Hi there everyone, I'm Lauren Bell. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist and I specialise in treating a range of common mental health problems such as depression and anxiety disorders. Some of you may also know me as the Yorkshire Therapist. So the purpose of this video today is to talk to you all about a specific therapy technique called thought challenging. And this comes off the back of the 2-minute mind hack that was shared on BBC Radio Sheffield this morning, which talked about thought challenging specifically. So the idea with thought challenging is that when we feel depressed and anxious, we start to engage and start to think in a way which becomes very, very negative. And if we start to think in a very negative way, that has a huge impact on how we feel, how we behave, and also how we feel physically. And so the idea with thought challenging is this technique is aimed at helping you, first of all, to spot negative thoughts in action. And then it's about teaching you to be able to challenge and balance them out so that you can think about things in a more balanced perspective. So what I'm going to do now is I've got a little bit of a formulate, we call it a formulation, but it's basically like a map that I'm going to share with you here, which looks just very quickly at the links between how we think and what we feel and what we do and physical symptoms we may be experiencing. And I'm just going to talk you through this and just kind of explain where kind of thought challenging fits into this cycle. So this here is what we call a 5 areas model, and this is something that we would use in CBT in the initial stages. Basically just to start to establish the links between how we think, how we feel, physical sensations and what we do. We also look at what things can trigger off changes in these different areas as well. So the idea is when we start to think in a negative way, that will start to then have a knock-on effect to our emotions. So we might have a negative thought about ourselves. This will then make us feel emotionally upset. That may then change what we do behaviourally, and then as a result of kind of feeling upset or thinking about ourselves in a negative way, we then notice changes in our physical kind of sensations as well. So thinking basically kind of can link into all of these areas, and like I've just said, once we start to notice a change in this area, but all of the other areas as well, very quickly we can find ourselves getting stuck in what we call a vicious cycle. So this is where we get a change in one of these areas that feeds into and links into another area, and before you know it, we're kind of feeling very kind of low and very stuck. So thought challenging and working on negative thoughts looks at this cycle, and it looks to try to break it by, first of all, helping you to spot and be aware of negative thoughts, and then it's about teaching you how to challenge those thoughts and balance them out. And the idea is if we can intervene here and break the cycle down by changing how you think, that will have a positive impact on all of these other areas and may alleviate symptoms of anxiety and depression. So first of all, so when you're wanting to engage in thought challenging, the first thing we need to do is to help you to be aware of those thoughts as they occur. And the best way to do this is to start to look out for what we call negative emotional shifts. So negative emotional shifts are when you start to notice yourself feeling more low or more anxious. And basically, if you can tune into those shifts in emotion happening, that will hopefully help you to see what negative thoughts you're having in association with that. So generally, you would only notice a negative emotional shift if you're thinking in a negative way. So once you start to notice yourself thinking these negative thoughts, what you can then do is you can engage in this thought challenging process. So on the mind hack this morning, I gave you a very brief kind of 3-step way of challenging thoughts. And what I'm going to talk to you about now is actually a slightly more long-winded version of it. So this is a 7-step approach to challenging thoughts. But either or can work. It just depends on how much time you've got and kind of what really fits best for you. So I'm going to show you here something called a 7-column thought record. So if you want kind of your own version of this, after you've watched the video today, you can contact me directly. So email me, which is theyorkshiretherapist@gmail.com, and I can email you over an electronic version of this so you can use it for yourself. But I'll just show you it kind of on the video today. So as you can see here, so this is a 7-column thought record. So the first thing that we want to do is, once we've noticed a negative emotional shift and we know we're thinking in a negative way, we want to fill out this first column here. So this first column is us capturing what situation or what trigger has led to this negative way of thinking. So the situation, it could be something specific, or it could be something, it could be just that the thoughts popped into your head, and the trigger could just be sat at home alone with your own thoughts. The second column is we want you then to kind of write down how that situation is making you feel. So I always say to my patients, when you're writing down emotions, make sure that you're just writing down one word. Don't get into explaining your emotions in a big long sentence. That's a thought. So emotions are just one word. So it might be low, depressed, anxious, worried. So you write down the one word, or a list of one words for how you're feeling, and then rate those out of 100% for how strong those emotions are. Once you've done that, column 3 is we want you to try to write down everything that's going through your mind at the time. So these are your negative automatic thoughts. So there may just be one negative automatic thought, or there may be a number of them. So write everything that you can think of that is going through your mind down in this column. And then before we move on to the next part of the sheet, what we want you to do is then to try to establish which of these thoughts is what we call the hot thought. So the hot thought is the thought that is the most upsetting. It's the thought that explains these emotions the most, and it's the one that is creating the most emotional distress. The reason we only want to pick one thought to challenge is if we try to challenge every single thought at once, it gets confusing, it gets hard to do, and you'll probably find yourself getting really frustrated with it. So just pick one thought, circle that as the hot thought, and then rate how much you believe that hot thought out of 100%. Once we've got the hot thought, that's what we're going to target, and then the next couple of columns here are the really, really important bits. So these columns are where we're going to start to appraise this thought using factual evidence. And I would say this is one of the key parts of the technique, really. So I would always say to my patients, when you're looking at facts, we want to pretend that you're in a court of law. So we're putting this hot thought up on the stand, and we're going to look at all the factual evidence that either supports that it's true or doesn't support that it's true. But the key thing is here is when we're writing down evidence is it's got to be fact. It cannot be another thought. It cannot be your interpretation. It can't be based on emotion. None of those things are fact. What we want to deal with here is factual evidence, things that are, definitely true, things that you can prove, and things that would stand up in a court of law if you were to present them to a judge. So evidence for in this column, evidence against in this column, and then once we've got our evidence for and against, what we then want to do is start to try to come up with a more balanced or alternative perspective. So I, again, will often prompt my patients and say, what would a friend say in this situation? Or if a friend gave you this information, how else could you think of it? So in this column, we want you to write down your alternative thought. It can often be useful to start with like although. So although this is true, that's also the case. So you write down your alternative thought. And then what I want you to do is then rate how much you believe that thought out of 100%. Once you've done that, I then want you to come back to this hot thought and then ask yourself, how much do I believe the hot thought now? And what you're hoping is that by coming up with a different perspective, we may start to get some kind of cognitive shift in this hot thought. So that your belief rating will drop in it. And then what we want you to do is, once you've rated the hot thought, is then in this final column here, re-rate the intensity of these emotions. So write the emotions down again and re-rate how strong they're currently feeling. And the idea and the hope is if we've been able to challenge this thought effectively and we've got some kind of shift in your belief rating for the thought, your emotions will actually drop in intensity and you'll start to feel kind of a little bit better and a little bit less upset or anxious. And then the final thing that you can do here in this kind of final column here is ask yourself, how can I now behave differently? So what can I do? How can I behave that is more in line with this more balanced way of thinking and in a way that will actually be more helpful? So what we tend to find is when we're thinking negatively, again, it changes what we do. But if we think about things in a more balanced perspective, we can start changing the way that we behave and respond. And that can actually help us to see that this more balanced perspective is, in fact, more factual. And that can boost and lift mood as well. So that's thought challenging in a nutshell. I have to say that this, of all the techniques that I kind of use in therapy, is definitely one of my favourites. It is a bit tricky and it is a bit kind of hard to get your head around in the first place, so don't worry if it feels a bit like intense in the beginning. And if you're just wanting like a quick way of doing this when you're out and about, I would just say kind of recognise the thought that you're having and just ask yourself, what's my evidence for this? Or how else can I think of this? Another good one is this a thought or is it a fact? Thoughts aren't facts. Facts are facts. So that's thought challenging in a nutshell. If you've got any questions, queries, or anything you want me to clarify around that, by all means get in touch, send me a message on this post or directly contact me. And I just want to thank you again for listening and for your ongoing support. So thank you. Bye-bye.